I hope that you will remember her with a few words, with a few feelings in your minds and in your hearts now, but we will remember her for years ahead through her work. And she remains the seminal researcher of African-American slave narrative and literature of the 19th century. And we will advise our students to get to know her and her lists of literature that are even called in Chelyabinsk University lists of Uddler, because she compiled them to broaden their knowledge further. So now we will return to our schedule, and today we will listen to Chris Cartwright, who graciously agreed to give us a keynote lecture on the aspects of success in American culture and how to approach them to deal with complexities of culture today. Please, Chris. He's studying intercultural communication. You can see his full regalia in our program, but I can assure you that all you will hear today his experience-based observations. And I think that is a very important aspect of American culture, that the practical uses of knowledge is the real way to go forward since the beginning of American culture, I would say. So we hope that we can hear from you some practical advice in this aspect too.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here with you. Thank you all for in advance for your time and patience. I'll share my screen with my PowerPoint now. Can you all see it?
Yes, we can see.
Good, and I will put it on presentation mode. Good. So I want to thank you all for inviting me today. I'm thrilled to be with you and deeply honored. As a fellow interdisciplinary scholar, I am pleased and honored and impressed with the work that you do, and thrilled that I can be with you. So I'm hoping that I can impart something of value for you. I'm particularly looking forward to your questions at the end. I find that to be the most interesting part of any presentation, and where, frankly, I will learn more from you than you're ever going to learn from me, and that's what it's about. So we'll move on. Our land acknowledgement. Portland, Oregon, where I'm presenting to you from, is in Multnomah County. I honor the indigenous people whose traditional and ancestral homelands I stand on. The Multnomah, Calumet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Watslada bands of the Chinook, and the Tualatin, Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. It is important to acknowledge the ancestors of this place and to recognize that I am here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In remembrance of these communities, I honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants. Please note that I am speaking to you today without the benefit of caffeine. This may seem like an odd way to start a plenary session, but particularly such an August gathering as yourselves, but I am a caffeine fiend and I love my coffee. But my doctor has advised me to eliminate it for a while due to some situations that minor medical issues I'm dealing with. And so if I seem dull or aggressive or even disengaged, I blame the coffee. If I am offer any insights of value and note, then please note that you are witnessing a miracle, me without coughing. Also, I wanted you to be aware that because of this medical condition, I sometimes need to take breaks. And what I will do when I do that is I will stay, break, please reflect. And I encourage you to think about what we've been talking about and generate some questions, throw them into the chat box while I'm away. And I'll be back in just a second. I apologize. This condition causes me to need to take breaks. So, our agenda today. What I want to talk to you about is what it is to be an interculturalist and what perspectives we bring. Address the construct of success and in the context of America. I'm hoping that it will be a good session. What I can say to you is that it will not be a linear, causal, these things get you these outcomes. It's more of a kaleidoscope of possibilities for you to be considering. And it's a way that I find is valuable in this lens, this way to bring out the work, and for us to be aware that teaching and learning is also culturally bounded. And so not being linear is a way of teaching. So what is culture and why is it important to us? Culture is a set of norms and values that are the foundation of the roles and rules of operating in a social system. It is learned in socially constructed situations through affiliation and observation. This comes from one of my mentors in the field, Milton Bennett. So what we're seeing here is that our baseline cultural norms, we learned at the knees of our grandparents, possibly our siblings and other family members. And these behaviors and communication styles were learned to meet their expectations of engagement and respect and our need for belongingness. We are social beings. I use the image of a tree here because the deep values that are imparted culturally are the root system, and they're often not seen. And then the branches are the behaviors that you can see. Do you like this music or that music? Which languages you speak, etc. These are things that are observable, and you can, they're there, but they're the deeper things like, what do I mean by respect? What do I mean by success? Who do I value? And why? Those are hidden. What we know now about trees, and I find this quite fascinating, is that the root systems beneath the ground connect, and the trees communicate with each other through their roots. And that's similar to what we do. It is frequently our deep set cultural values that are engaged in communicating with us, and they are having the deeper meaning, the deeper value, but they're not seen. And so I find that a fascinating analogy that I just learned. This plays a role in many countries, but particularly in the US, within the construct of civitas. This we learned from the philosopher Aristotle. He says its meaning is learning to live in the city. He explains that very young children feel a natural kinship or a sense of cultural belonging and comfort with blood relatives. As children grow up, they learn to interact with immediate neighbors and schoolmates, and their kinship definitions are broadened to include friends. When people are fully mature and need to assume adult responsibilities in the public square of the city, they need to learn to extend that feeling of kinship to all of humanity. So we are to extend our sense of kinship and belongingness to the stranger. I learned this from a theologian named Richard Mouw, and it really was mind-blowing to me, because in a democratic society like we have in the US, we're very pluralistic. We're a very complex country and culture. Yet, in order to be a democracy, we have to vote, we have to do business, we have to live next to each other, all with a sense of belongingness. And that's complex, it's not easy work. This work doesn't always go well. Frequently, when groups that are different from each other have met each other for one reason or another, cultural groups, it's led to bloodshed, oppression, and genocide. This comes out from Milton Bennett, the cultural anthropologist and interculturalist who I mentioned earlier. We're going to go deeply into the concept of civitas and how it plays in America, but I think it's an interesting point to bring out at this point in the address. The father of intercultural studies is a scholar named Edward T. Hall, and he points out that culture hides much more than it reveals. And strangely enough, what it hides most effectively from its own participants. The real job is not to understand the foreign culture, but to understand our own culture. And for me and my work, in a country like the US, that is very diverse and very complex, I often find that the people who I engage don't know that they have a culture. They assume that their root structure, their cultural structure, is shared by everyone. It is the exact same. And when we point out that maybe slightly different, or a different perspective on that, it can be confusing, disorienting. And so what I find is of great value and very important to do is to learn first about yourself and your own perspective, your own culture, where you're coming from. And from there, you'll be able to engage others. I often use the analogy of fish swimming in a stream. When you're in a current, it's all going in a direction and you're in a school of fish, everything seems the same. You don't know that you're in the water. You're unaware that the stream is going in one direction or another. It's all easy flowing. But it's when we bump into other fish or other animals or rocks and eddies and swirls in the river, we run into new cultures, and that can be disorienting. One of the best ways to do this, I find, is with children's books. And this author, Leah Leone, has this wonderful article called Fish is Fish book, children's book. In it, a minnow and a tadpole are living together in a pond, and they are best mates. They swim apart, they dart behind rocks and seaweed and find things to snack on and play tag. It's a lovely time to be young in the pond. From here, they mature. The fish becomes a full fish, and the tadpole grows legs, becomes a full frog. And the minnow, the fish, lives fully within the culture of the pond that it knows and understands, whereas the frog is able to go outside and see new things, experience new things, the outer world. And he comes back and he meets the fish and he tries to describe the outer world. He explains that there's these amazing creatures, there's these things called birds, and they fly in the sky way up high and they eat worms. The fish considers this. He says, and then there are these cows. They sit on great fields and they eat grass, and they have these udders, these great teats of milk underneath, and people come and squeeze them and get milk to drink. And the fish tries to conceptualize this. But the tadpole says the most interesting are the things called people. They walk erect in little pods, they call them families. And he finds them just the most fascinating. And they wear clothes all the time. And again, the fish tries to examine them. And this is what he sees. Because he only knows his own point of view. He only knows the world within the pond. So first, he needs to understand that not everything is the same. And from that, he'll be able to learn to compare and contrast things. Now, my point in sharing children's story to an esteemed audience, such as yourselves, is to illustrate that we cannot see something new, someone new, without first understanding who we are and the lenses we are using, the cultural lenses that we've learned deeply through experience, through the culture, through our upbringing. By learning to recognize our own culturally bounded perspectives, learning to compare and contrast what we are perceiving, we ultimately find the commonalities in which to engage. We reach an entree point of what we call intercultural competence by learning to respect the differences we find. This is a lifelong practice that can support our growth and engagement across our lives. To me, it is essential to success in America, especially in the context of North America, where democracies require participation with cultural strangers. So we want to get multiple perspectives of who we are. Yes? Intercultural competence is the ability to engage effectively and appropriately in a variety of cultural contexts. You will note that I have highlighted and italicized effective and appropriate, because depending on the cultural context in which you are engaging, what's effective and appropriate is different. It doesn't always remain the same. And that's part of this learning to adapt to cultural differences. Hall, in his seminal book, The Silent Language, described the experience as his experience as a government employee in the southwest of the US, trying to improve the management of water in the arid region during the Great Depression of the 1930s. To do this, he had to build trusting relationships with people from the Hopi and Navajo tribes of Native America in that region, as well as the people who identified as Hispanic Americans and Anglo-Americans. He observed that each grouping had a different way to communicate, both verbally and especially non-verbally. One group was expressive, displayed emotions, used gestures, and a lot of words to communicate. The other group was reserved, used few words, few gestures, kept their emotions hidden. He learned that to reach an agreement and to carry out the task, to carry tasks out took very different forms of collaboration than it did in the all male elite monocultural preparatory school that he went to as a child, where everyone pretty much came from the same background and spoke the same language, etc. It wasn't very hard to figure out where people were coming from in that pond, shall we say. But he had to really look at different ways. So when we think, you're looking at the groups that he was working with, one group was motivated by financial gain. They wanted to be able to plant more, do more with the water. Another was motivated by communal gain. They wanted to serve their people, help them live. One was most interested in preserving harmony. They didn't want conflict, no wars, peace. And still another preferred to meet the current best practices as outlined by scientific or policy benchmarks. So each came to the collaboration with a different mindset and a way to do their work. Reach an agreement on why the water should be conserved, for whom, where, and how was not an easy task. It took a lot of adaptation to cultural difference to complete this work. Ultimately, the success was found. Reservoirs and wells were dug, water was channeled and made more accessible, but the framing of success was different for each group. Intercultural competence was essential for this existed. Again, my purpose in addressing ways to success in American culture is a very broad request, and I appreciate Alex and Larissa for giving me such a wide path to navigate, especially without my beloved coffee and fear that I might go off in odd directions, but they gave me a broad ways to go. Ways of success could indicate many things. maybe an achievement of some kind, maybe finding prosperity or a good fortune. Common attributes of success are finding a home and a place of belonging, whether this is a physical space or a community. Having the love and support as well as the ability to support one's family, however that family may be defined. Having access to education in whatever form or level you may seem fit. And finally, wealth, and broadly defined, whether it be financial or abundance of friends, family, and opportunity. The freedom to choose the ways that you may like to be successful in respect of your community and peers for this work. It's quite a large line. When we think of American culture, it's quite a kaleidoscope. It's a confluence of difference. There are many ways that people have come here. We are dominantly a land of immigrants, with proud yet small remaining culture of Native Americans, or as the Canadians prefer the term, First Nations people, who suffered at the arrival of immigrant populations and have struggled to live, let alone succeed in any meaningful way or sense with the onslaught of modern immigration that started literally in the 1400s. Then among the immigrants are populations from a huge variety of segmentations based on when they arrived, whether it was within the last 6 months or the last 6 centuries, and how and why they arrived. Were they enslaved? Did they arrive by choice? Or were they forced out of their former homelands due to economic, political, social, or religious upheaval? As well as how they might choose to define and enact the constructs of home, family, education, and wealth. Interculturalists look at what we call intercultural, culturally bounded generalities. This is very tiny. I'll make sure you get it as a handout. By these, we mean that studying constructs like task and tight time orientation versus relationship and flexible time orientations are spectrums of behaviors that a person may prefer to complete their task on time, on budget, with precision, or they may feel that maintaining harmony, relationships, taking time is more important. There's many ways to frame these cultural generalities and norms. Some scholars, people like Dr. Hofstede, Trump from the Netherlands, Trumpenauers and Hampton Turner from the UK, and Worston also from out of the Netherlands, tend to categorize these in nation state ways. These nations, the people from these nations tend these behaviors more than others. And as an interculturalist, I find that curious and sometimes helpful, but there's a range. You have to think of a bell curve of possibilities. And so you may find people with a full spectrum of preferences. I would hazard to say that the fact that I'm online now with people dominantly from a Russian background who are interested in American culture, by definition, you don't meet the norm of Russian society. You are on the tail end of the bell curve. You might even call you abnormal. And so we have to be aware that our interests and how we express them there's a broad range, and we want to be aware of them and use them as best we can. So when we think of the US and all the differences that you can bump into, we often look at our diversity. It is our strength and our challenge. And you could look at race and ethnicity. You could look at generation. You could look at gender. You could look at sexual orientation, ability. There's so many ways to look at the complexity of American culture. This diagram is called the diversity wheel by Garden Schwartz and Rowe is a common way to look at it. And what's unique about this is that because we are American, each of these cells can be broadly defined. So take, for example, ability, and this should be broadly ability, not just fixed physical ability. In the US, because of the American with Disabilities Act, which I helped write, by the way, I'm very proud of that work, there's a broad construct of what is ability and how it should be looked at, managed, and engaged. And we have special rules for access to buildings and transportation, but also learning and how we communicate. As an instructor at the university, I'm given long lists of things that I'm to do to accommodate different learning abilities amongst my students. And that's a common occurrence here. Race and ethnicity, like I said, is very different, and it makes a big difference when you arrived. Were you just arriving to this country? Or are you second or third generation, or has your family been here for so long in such ways that you don't know when your family arrived? You don't know the lineage and what cultural norms have been passed on for how many centuries. Race comes in a similar way. In some ways, it's obvious. In other ways, because we are such a pluralistic society, there's a lot of what we call mixed race people, and you don't know where people come from or how they identify. So depending on the salience of that piece, but it's an important construct. Age, generations make a big difference on how we go. What I, as a boomer, someone born between the late 40s and the early 60s, experience is different from someone who is, say, a millennial who was born in the late 80s, early 90s, and how they've been brought up and engaged the world. And I'll talk about those in a while. The US is unique in that you may choose your gender. You may be born to a gender, but we respect your right to choose how you want to identify. And that varies from region to region and cultural group to cultural group. But legally, you can do this. And that's unique to the US, not to the US. There's many places in the world where that's possible. There's many places in the world where that is definitely not possible. So it depends. We were founded as a refuge for religious freedom. Okay. And so the people who came here from Europe and settled our eastern border came here because they weren't allowed to practice their religion the way they wanted to in their home countries in Europe. And so here they had freedom. And when they were finally free of their European governments, they chose a government form that is secular. We don't have a state religion. And purposely chose not to support or deny any religion. Yet there are cultural norms that make it easier to be Christian than Jewish or Arabic, particularly given the light of the war here. And there's lots of the recent war in the Middle East. Educational background, it makes a big difference in terms of success, what you've learned and how you've learned it. Edward T. Hall spoke of going to this very exclusive preparatory school and then on to a very fine university. So his classmates were from the wealthiest, most prominent families, and they were sent to these special schools, frankly, so that they would learn good manners and civility and to be good citizens. But they had very high standards for themselves. Others, may find education a difficult thing to have access to and to work. Work experience, were you a white collar worker? Did you were brought up in that situation? Were you a factory worker, a farmer, a service worker? There's many ways that people come into this, and it also takes paths and so forth. So there's just so many things that make America complex. Geographic is huge. We're a large country, not as large as Russia, but large. And how people in the South talk and behave and expect you to engage them versus the Pacific Northwest, the opposite end of the country, are drastically different. And there are cultural norms, how that all comes together and why. So it's important to embrace that complexity. So for us to do this work, we have to recognize that we're going to need a mindset, knowledge, and attitudes, learning to learn, learning to listen, attitudes of openness are important for this type of success. One of the ways that people look at our country is often to look at the concept of individualism versus collectivism, and the idea that we are more of an individualistic country, so the gains that we have, the goals that we have, they're owned by the person. They're my thing. I achieved them. I did them for myself, maybe for my family, but it's a much more individualistic. We're in more collectivist culture. It may be that we did it for my family or my tribe or my company. But again, there's a huge spectrum how this work would go and why. And you can see that that in America, because we're a very pluralistic country, that we see all sorts of individualistic versus collective forms of expression. One that I heard on the radio just yesterday, a new book came out by a television personality named Oprah Winfrey, very famous woman in the US, very, very wealthy African-American woman who had a television show for years and does good work. And she recently came out with a book with another friend of ours named Albert Brooks on happiness. And to her, what she learned and wanted to express through this book is that when you have something, when you've been gifted with something, that the benefit of it is of greater value to you if you share it. And it is in the sharing that you gain happiness. Interesting construct of framing success, particularly from a woman who is a billionaire, okay? So success can be very broad. Some people are very results oriented. Some people are very process oriented. Some people are very harmony oriented when they think of achievement and what goes on. I'll tell you a story. Years ago, I worked in a school of education and I was asked to support a group of Native Americans who wanted to create a curriculum that expressed what the possibilities were across the school, what we call K-12, kindergarten through high school, on all the subjects, but from a Native perspective. So they put together lesson plans, and I, as an educator, non-Indian, who had worked at reviewing and approving curriculum, was to act as a sounding board, an advisor as to how they would make their curricula fit the standards to be adopted by schools across the state of Oregon. The group is called Wisdom of the Elders, and they do wonderful work in interviewing Native elders from around the country and telling stories. And in the curriculum, there was a story of an elder woven into each of them. And the one that I want to share with you is one on, it was a mixed, because Native American mindsets don't separate sciences from arts and social sciences. It's always blended and woven together. And so it was a curriculum on weaving of a basket of a special grass that was used to pack dried food that the Native men would take out on the hunt and fishing away from the village. So it had to be compact and be able to hold their food together for them. And there were special patterns and all sorts of things about what you packed them with and why. But I came to this room to see the curriculum, and the natives said, well, it's a very complex curriculum, and we have to tell you that the grass is endangered. We're not allowed to harvest it because it's been over-harvested, and because of industrialization and farming, et cetera, its spaces of most growth are limited. So we mustn't pick it. We have to nurture it back to health. But it's a very pliable grass, and it has the shape of a straw that you would take a drink out of. So we thought of using straws, but plastic straws are made from plastic, and that's not environmentally sound. So we can't use those. So we tried paper straws, but they don't hold up to the weaving process. They break off too easily and fall apart. So we kept thinking and thinking, and the whole room was trying to help them come up with what the right material was. And someone had brought food, snacks for us to have during this meeting in paper, brown paper bags that American groceries came in. And the people in the room started ripping up the bags into strips and rolling them into straws. And everyone started weaving with the straws. And I'm sitting here in total disbelief because this whole process of the curriculum, learning objective, lesson plans, how it would be carried out, how it would be assessed, why it meant to benchmark, none of that had been addressed. We'd spent 45 minutes figuring out what the hell we're going to make a straw out of. I sat there and I said, what are we doing? And finally they came up with it and they were able to explain the rest of it. And I had to sit back and I thought, this is a cultural group that values the process of learning what is right. And in that process, they will move to the result. But from a more Anglo-Western perspective, I would have preferred a quick synopsis and maybe a couple of minutes on why rolled up paper bags were better than others. In fact, I had to say to them, I'm glad you did this. This has been very educational. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But when you go in front of the actual school board and request approval, do not spend 45 minutes on materials. You will not be accepted for that. So keeping in mind how that comes together and why. I'm going to take a break here and tell a couple of stories and go back to slides. One way in looking at success is, what is home? How do you call home? I'm just now noticing that this shade is here for 1 second. It's a sunny day in Portland, Oregon. Now you can't see my face. Oh well. And I live on a street where there is a Seventh-day Adventist church. So at the end of the street is a church of people who do their Sabbath on Saturday, which is rare in America. Most people who have a Sabbath do it on Sunday, unless you're Jewish. Christians mostly do Sabbath on Saturday. And because they use their chapel on Saturday, they rent out their chapel on Sunday to other Christian groups. And one of the groups they rented out to were the group of Russian Orthodox who had emigrated here. And so on Sunday, and it's just 2 doors away, the Russians would all come and park in the lot and go to the church. And I really loved it when they opened up the back door of the chapel. I could hear this gorgeous music rolling out, very different from the Christian hymns. And it was just fun having all the Russians in the neighborhood. They have since gone on to have their own chapel. They bought out another church several blocks in another direction, and have built onto it and made it quite elegant. And they've made quite a big church for themselves. That's their spiritual home. But they've grown in their size and complexity, and now they have their own home. And I was studying how they lived and where they lived, and noted that when the local housing authority was talking about, well, what's appropriate for these families, they found that the common Portland apartment, which is a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment that's quite small, was not appropriate for a Russian family that tended to emigrate and live with multiple generations. So they bought up other apartment complexes and knocked out walls between apartments so that there were multiple bedrooms and living rooms connected, and families could live. And newer ones were built where they'd be a building that in the typical Portland sense would have had 8 or 12 apartments in it. But for the Russians, it may only have 4 because they wanted their families to live together. So what is home? How is it set up? And why is it more appropriate to have multiple bedrooms in a large kitchen where multiple people can work together in the kitchen, as opposed to a little efficiency in all in one space? Home, where you find it where it goes. I talked to a friend of mine Her name is Tamara Thorpe, and she's an African-American woman who's a specialist on working across generations. She calls herself the millennial coach. And she was coaching a group of millennials about success and how they were going to use their resources. And she was listening to them talk about the fact that they would never tie their money up in real estate. They had no intention of buying a house. It was a waste of time. They wanted their money free for other things. They didn't want to have to mow the lawn or be responsible for the plumbing, where my generation wanted to own a home. That's part of success and security, was to own your home and take care of those things. And so it was a different concept of home, and it was generational informed. Interesting, that's so many ways that we can do this. I'll go back to my slides now. So how we communicate across difference is very important. And interculturalists love to study this. Most communication is nonverbal. So what space do we have between us? How much touch do we use? How fast do we talk? How slow do we talk? The body language, volume, tone, all of these have great meaning and value and need to be watched very carefully. Sometimes we're very direct. 1, 2, 3, this is the point. Sometimes we're kind of indirect. Yeah, maybe we'll get to this. Sometimes we're circular. We go in circles and tell a story. Sometimes we're comprehensive. We tell all the details. Sometimes we're linear. That's really different. So a friend of mine, Carmen Dinev, lived in Los Angeles. She immigrated from Mexico, and she ran an agency that served Mexican immigrants. And she asked them once about what it was like to communicate with their American counterparts when they went out into the world and went to their schools or their shops and did their work. But mostly Mexican women in this country. And they all laughed, and they said, Mexican Americans are very, very funny the way they communicate. It's like talking to a filing cabinet. And all these are files of different things. And I may ask you a question about your studies or your travels or something. And you would go to your filing cabinet, an American, and they would open the drawer, pull out the file called studies. And they would say, well, I went to this school, and then I went to this university, and I studied these subjects, and that's what I did. And close the file and put it back in, and they're done. 1, 2, 3, that's their conversation about studies. For the Mexican, they would tell a story, and they would say, well, you know, I first became interested in learning at church. I was there, and I was fascinated by all the stories and the Bible verses and all the imagery. So I asked the priest about them, and he took me back and showed me the library. And he explained to me all the images and the vestments and what people were doing. And I found that really fascinating. So I learned it that way. And then as I went on to work, I learned from my friends about different ways to learn and so forth. And then I traveled, and I met new people and saw new things. And I saw that families had celebrations that were very different. And there were all these different ways that I learned. The point is the circle in the middle, and it's never stated exactly. And the reason being is that in Mexican and Mexican-American culture, when you go directly to the point, you do that with people who are very young and not very developed, or people who are kind of feeble-minded. So if I go directly to the point and I'm communicating with you, it means I think you're stupid. But if I give you a big tableau, I tell you all the different details and paint this big story, you will understand how I learn and why I learn this way. And it's because you're sophisticated. I respect your sophistication. So the communication style is very, very different. You know, we're going to have a break here, and I'm going to ask you to reflect, and I'll be right back.
Dear friends, if you have questions, possibly you might also put them into the chat so that you won't forget your question by the time that the talk is over. And so I'm just suggesting that you can use the chat for that.
I was talking to, welcome back. I apologize for the break. Thank you for allowing me that. When we think about responsibility, which is a big cultural thing, there are people who are very particular that the way that you behave is set by rules, and you will follow all the rules 1, 2, 3 in order. Others are much more, or no, particularly not universals, all the same rules. Particularism is where the rules shift based on who you are and what you brought to the room, what your background is, what's the context of the situation. Some take responsibility personal, some take it societal, sometimes it's subjective or objective. So I was talking to a colleague of mine, a woman named Deborah Levine, who was very well known for her work in diversity, particularly around religion. And she told me a story about her own family and how they came from Russia and how they emigrated here and what their experience was. And that when her grandfather arrived in the US, he settled, he sold shoes from a cart and traveled all over the state of Massachusetts and the Boston area. And that's what he did. And he would come back and raise his family, but he very much wanted them to get a good education. And that was important. So he worked really hard, saved up his money, and his children went on to Harvard and became doctors and lawyers. And she's now a granddaughter, and she went on to get a doctorate there in divinity, social sciences. And it was very important that the children get a good education and move on from his world and have a new life. But what was also important was what they did with that. And so each of the children do things like the lawyer does public service law, the doctor works in a clinic for people who are poor. She does work in advocating for diverse and underrepresented populations. So their achievement, how they measure success, is who they are serving, how they are serving, and what is the breadth and depth of the impact of their work. And that is a very interesting way to frame and think about how we go about our work. It's the again, back to Dr. Bennett, there are several religious themes around the golden rule, treating people as they would like to be treated. And many religions around the world, all of which are present in the US, share a construct of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. To treat others as you would like to be treated are variations of that. And in a pluralistic society, one that's complex like our own, Dr. Bennett advocates that we do what he calls the platinum rule. And that is do unto others as they would have done unto themselves. That is a different construct. And it takes getting to know yourself, where you come from, getting to know others. It takes holding judgment and being willing to say, well, it's different from how I would do it, but I can see where you're coming from. It takes a willingness to stretch and bend different constructs of right and wrong and good behavior versus bad behavior so that we can engage more fully. These are constructs that are very important. So, it was just one of those very interesting constructs. I'll close with a Russian story, but rewritten by an American named John Muth, but originally by Tolstoy. Called The Three Questions. There once was a boy named Nikolai who sometimes felt uncertain about the right way to act. I want to be a good person, he told his friends, but I don't always know the best way to do that. Nikolai's friends understood and they wanted to help him. If only I could find the answer to my three questions, Nikolai can question, then I would always know what to do. When is the best time to do things? Who is the most important one? And what's the right thing to do? Nikolai's friends considered his questions. First, Sonia, the heron, spoke. Think about the cultural norms and values you're hearing, as I refer to these animals. Then Sonia spoke. To know the best time to do things, one must plan in advance. Google, the monkey, who had been rotating through some leaves to find something good to eat, said, you will know when to do things if you watch and pay close attention. Pushkin, the dog, who just dozed off, rolled over and said, you can't pay attention to everything yourself. You need a pack to keep watch and help you decide when to do things. For example, Gogol, the coconut is about to fall on your head. Nikolai thought for a moment, and then he asked for a second question. What's the most important one? Those who are close to heaven, said Sonia, circling in the sky. Those who know how to heal the sick, said Gogol, stroking his bruised noggin forehead. Those who make the rules, growled Pushkin, the dog. Nikolai thought for a moment, and then he asked the third question, what is the right thing to do? Flying, said Sonia. Having fun all the time, said Gogol. Fighting, barked Pushkin. Then the boy thought for a long time. He loved his friends, and he knew that they were trying their best to help him answer his questions, but their answers did not seem great. Then he had an idea. I know. I will ask Leo the turtle. He has lived a long time. Surely he will know the answers I'm looking for. So Nikolai hiked up to the mountains where the old turtle lived alone. When Nikolai arrived, Leo was digging in his garden. He was an old turtle, and digging was hard for him. I have three questions I have come to ask for help, said Nikolai. When is the best time to do things? Who's the most important one? And what's the right thing to do? Leo listened carefully, but he only smiled. Then he went on to his digging. You must be tired, Nikolai said. Let me help you. The turtle gave his shovel, and he thanked him, because it was much easier for a young boy to dig than for an old turtle. Nikolai kept digging till all the rows were finished. Just then, the wind blew wildly and the rain burst in the dark clouds. They moved toward the cottage for shelter. Nikolai suddenly heard a cry. Running through the path, he found a panda whose leg had been injured by a falling tree. He carefully carried her into Leo's house and made a splint for her leg with a stick of bamboo. The storm raged on, banging at the doors and windows. When the panda woke up, she said, where am I? Where is my child? The boy ran out the cottage and down the path. The roar of the storm was deafening. Pushing against the howling of the wind and drenching in the rain, he ran further into the forest. There he found the panda's child, cold and shivering on the ground. The panda was wet and scared, but alive. Nikolai carried her inside and made her warm and dry, and laid her in the arms of her mother. Leo smiled when he saw what the boy had done. The next morning, the sun was warm. The birds sang, and all was well in the world. The panda's leg was healing nicely, and she thanked Nikolai for saving her and her baby in the storm. At that moment, Sonia, Gogol, and Pushkin arrived to make sure everyone was all right. Nikolai felt great peace within himself. wonderful friends, and they had saved a panda and her child. They also felt disappointed. He still had not found the answers to his questions, his 3 questions. So he asked Leo one more time. And then the old boy looked at the boy and says, "But your questions have been answered." "They have answered them." "Yesterday," said Leo, "if you had not stayed to help and dig me in the garden, you wouldn't have heard the pen's cries for help in the storm. Therefore, the most important time is a time you spent digging in the garden, and the most important one at the moment was me. The most important thing to do is helping with my garden. Later, when you found the injured panda, the most important time was you spent mending her leg and saving the child. The most important ones were the panda and the baby. And the most important thing was to take care of them and make them safe. Remember, when there is only one important time, and the time's now, the most important one is always the one you're with. And the most important thing to do is to do good for the one who's standing at your side. These, my dear boy, are the answers to the most important questions of the world. That's why we're here. Oops, hold it. I have one more slide. This is the quote that got me through my studies. "There is wisdom in turning as often as possible from the familiar to the unfamiliar. Keeps the mind nimble, kills prejudice, and fosters good humor." That's what I prepared for you today. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Please, questions?
Well, I can ask, can you hear me well?
I can hear you beautifully.
Yeah, well, that was, at least I enjoyed your presentation very much. And as I talked to you before, many things were familiar, but you were able to tell many stories and build on unfamiliar. And I mean, I have many questions, but one question that I would like you to address is that it seems that there is this dichotomy of, I mean, culture is being socially constructed, and one way for communities is to, well, not way, but one feature of the communities is to preserve their culture, kind of to foster their children in their cultural norms and values, and maybe like go to church, be more traditional and things like that. At the same time, you mentioned that to learn new things, we need to bump into another person with different cultural values. But to do that, to bump into another person, we need to, well, go outside or go from your own yard or go to a different country, go live in different city, sort of face these challenges and other and sometimes hardships, but most importantly, different cultural values and norms. Not necessarily, well, partly to to move along Milton Bennett model of intercultural sensitivity, excuse me, but most importantly, to be able to learn another culture. And following your story of the fish and toad in the water, which I loved, is to be able to begin to understand yourself. So I mean, I'm not sure even how to phrase the question, but where do you find the right way between preserving your own culture and learning you and accepting you cultural values and norms?
Rich question. Thank you for that. It's very complex, and that's where what I find is interesting is it's important for people in a pluralistic culture like the North America to recognize first and foremost that they live in a pluralistic culture and that all is possible. And whereas, like we just celebrated the what in the US we call the Thanksgiving holiday. It's a kind of a founding of the nation, and there's a great feast and lots of myths about pilgrims and Native Americans sharing a meal, and it's a big deal. And so there's a whole thing around what it is that we share versus what we don't share, and what is different for us. And so first is recognizing that you live in a pluralistic society and that all possibilities are present. You can choose, and by all means, that's one of the things that you do when you live in a democracy like ours. You can choose how you express that, but you can't deny that others are present. And so it's a boundary thing about where it is that you go. So I find great joy in celebrating certain holidays and traditions that are from my family and the religious backgrounds that I've been brought up in. But to enjoy that without judging someone who does it differently or doesn't share that particular one. And so it's this fulcrum, this edge, and it's a practice. And that's the thing about the tension. It's a dynamic tension. You know, the Taoists have that yin yang thing, and it's a tension, a constant grinding and tension of this is my perspective, this is your perspective, but they have to learn to live and work together. Not easy to do. And as you can see, the US and in many countries, we're not alone in this, often gets into great disagreements about that. But I have found that by becoming curious, very, very important. So learning to be curious about yourself and your own background and what your norms and values are is important. And then from there, learning to engage others. So making and maintaining relationships with people who are culturally different. There's lots of research that, you know, Gordon Allport in his work on contact theory was that when you brought groups that were different together, they could learn to not dislike each other. Okay, we would put Black people and white people in the same room and say, y'all don't stay in this room for a while. And eventually they would become less anxious about each other. But the actual building of a relationship that was productive for both of them came when they learned what we call cognitive complexity, that what they're witnessing is a both and. It's not a right way or a wrong way. You can do it this way, you can do it that way. It's a both and. That is a learning through experience. You can't do it by being alone in your own bubble, in your own culture. But I maintain that in the US, it's exceedingly difficult to be alone in your own culture. There are pockets, believe me, there are pockets. And there are people who strongly prefer to keep to their own, my people, my own people, etc. For a variety of reasons. But for the most part, you know, you can't bank, you can't grocery shop, you can't go to church, you can't go to work, etc., without engaging the multiple differences that is the US society. And so then it's a matter of doing that with an open mind, with an attitude of learning and being willing to practice it. And the thing about cultural competency that I advocate is that it's more like a practice of a core muscle structure. You know, when you go to a gym, and I have a coach who works with me, and I'm supposed to work my core. I'm supposed to have a good, strong core so I can stand up and hold my own, okay? But I also need flexibility. I need to be able to bend and stretch and pick myself up when I fall. And you're going to make mistakes. So you need a combination of strength and flexibility in who I are, but flexibility in terms of what's right, what's wrong, what I engage, what I don't engage. And it is a practice. You're never done practicing. I am not culturally competent. I practice cultural competency, but I can't check it off. So it's a matter of being willing and able to make those stretching and engagement. And the US is a giant experiment in it. It's been going on since its founding. And for a variety of reasons, in certain areas, we've done relatively well. In other ones, let's be blunt, we suck. You know, the immigrants who came here went across the country like locusts and made the Native Americans' life hell. If you were enslaved and brought to this country, it's still not an equal and safe place to live and learn and be. And that's 500 years. So the experiment is still ongoing. It's not realized, but at least we have it as a mission and a value. It's written into our Constitution. And there are those who will fight it right and left, as they're doing right now, as we're gearing up for election and who can vote where and what the boundaries are and which party you're gonna affiliate with. We're never done with that struggle. That's part of the joy and challenge of being an American. Great question, thank you.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up, and which I often hear at the discussions at the conferences at our field, and you addressed this briefly. You talked about importance of three parts: knowledge, abilities, and attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
And well, trying to link it to the theme of the conference of well, success in general, success in America. And I also did a study quite a long time ago in corporate America, where Americans were pointing out that abilities and then followed by knowledge were most important, while Europeans, well, more specifically Russians, were saying that attitudes and who the person is more important than knowledge and ability. When you're hiring someone, do you think, like, how would you prioritize? If you prioritize, maybe you will not prioritize those three components, and how, which ones of them are or will be more important for success in America?
Yeah, it's a rich question, and I can see where it's coming from. You know, it's an interesting thing. It is true that we often hire on skills and abilities, and knowledge sets and skills. And but I have often found that attitudes are very, very important and need to be taken into account. And because they can throw things off. I once was hiring a database manager, kid you not, and we had this candidate, and her resume was perfect. I could not have found a better candidate for this particular role. And my co-interviewee and I were thrilled to have her in the room, and she threw out this stuff and she was explaining what she could do and why. And oh my God, did we need her in our operation? And then, it's typical in American interviews, you ask questions about, you know, what have you learned from mistakes, and in your world, where do you need to grow? We're trying to basically round out the personality, maybe ferret out some attitudes. And the woman started telling about her inability to hold her temper and how she often slapped her office mates, really slapped them, and didn't understand why she was terminated. And I just kind of looked at her and I thought, one, I can't believe you told me this in a job interview, and it doesn't matter that your resume is perfect. I'm not hiring you. We politely closed the interview and shredded her resume and didn't invite her back anymore because her brilliance and skill set was not going to work in my office. You could not slap my office mates. So understanding where people are coming from and why. I recently completed a study about women's leadership and what happened during the pandemic. So we studied women around the US who had to change the way they lead, and what that did. We're presenting this in a few days. And at the core for your conference, and the core, what happened was that the women found that the corporate culture often wasn't fitting their new context. And so they changed how they worked and led and or left that corporate culture so that they could thrive and succeed as leaders. So they had to reach within, be flexible, and change what they did and how they did it because it wasn't going to work in a COVID lockdown pandemic. And if the agency wasn't supporting them, they would leave the agency because there was another job that was more appropriate for them. So it's recognizing that these attitudes of belief in yourself and also what's right and wrong, and also what is possible in this context of being open to the possibilities, make a huge difference. I often hire for the capability, the ability to grow. the willingness to grow, the willingness to engage. And I want certain baseline skills in order, but that changes. You know, I was talking to Tamara Thorpe about millennials versus boomers and this big fights about generational. And boomers come early, stay late, work hard. The harder they do, the better they do. They want to be on top of it, and they're very competitive that way. I'm told it was because I was born the year of Sputnik, and we were competing with your people and had to out-achieve the Russians, and so we were schooled to achieve. Where millennials didn't have those particular issues, and they want to have a life, and so work is something they go to. They work, live to work versus work to live. See the difference? And so they want to have a life. I have a niece, love my niece. She is a cider maker. Great amounts of apple cider are brought, and she has learned to brew them with different flavors. She's really, really good at her job. She and her husband owned 2 little tasting rooms for their. One is considered the smallest bar in the state of Michigan. Only 8 people can be in it at a time. They love the individuality and the smallness of their work. And I watched her one day individually canning for cider. There was a little machine, and she would pull one lever and fill the can, and pull another lever, and the aluminum top would go on the top, and she'd press it. And that's how they can their work. And I looked at her and I said, aren't there factories that do this, big machinery? Couldn't you do this on a grander scale and sell this? And she says, no, Uncle Chris. This is my business, my husband's business. We are family people. I want to be free to go to the school when my children are doing things. I want my weekends off. I want to be able to have a full life. I'm not going corporate. I'm not going to franchise. I don't want to expand. Her sense of achievement was what I do feeds my family. I have a house, I have food, I have children, they are schooled. That's why I'm doing this. I don't want expansion. Whereas my generation would say, well, you know, let's get a bigger warehouse and more machines, and we'll go this and we'll franchise this, or, you know, use steroids and, you know, fertilizers so we can grow more of this. You know, it's just more, grow. Okay. Construct. What is success? Why? How? And generationally bounded.
Thank you.
Others of you.
Thank you very
Who
much.
else has a question? Oh, I see a hand up. Please. Tanya.
Yeah, good evening. Привет, Moscow. Wonderful to see you all again. I was really impressed by your presentation, and somehow it, especially this last part when you opened the discussion about, you know, people being hired due to their competence, and somehow I would also have a question, just a hypothetical one, whether the cultural background would be, let's say, equally important as people's competences when hiring. For instance, I don't think that I could possibly be hired anywhere in the United States, no matter how highly competent I am, and you know, with my educational background, due to, let's say, this cultural thing that we have discussed. Do you agree that, you know, the competence somehow relates to the cultural background when it comes to this question of, let's say, like hiring people? And because it was just opened, and I would really like to hear your opinion.
Yeah. It's a very complex situation here because what's happening in the U.S. at the moment, things shift. There's always a shift in thinking. Is that the protection of people to be able to get an education and be hired came under an umbrella of laws called affirmative action and civil rights laws, are being pulled back. People are going backwards and wanting not to have to require those as often. And so it's in decline at the moment, but I wouldn't say it's gone, okay? And so it's an interesting dilemma. So one thing that I have found is that my colleagues who work in corporations and were in charge of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and they were advocating, and so they had special ways to hire, so everyone had equal access to how they read the job description, how their resumes would be read. They did blind readings. They didn't see your name. They didn't see your cultural background. So there are all these ways to make it easier for broad people, people from broad backgrounds to get hired. And I said, well, we don't really need to do that so much anymore. We can back off on that. And then the corporations have said, actually, we still need to do that. We can't be held up by the court. The courts aren't demanding it of us, but I don't have enough employees. And the other thing that we've learned is that monocultural work groups are not terribly effective. They tend to do single mindset and they're not as creative. And so you get the same thing all the time. And so, but diverse work groups, if they're well facilitated, are the most productive. They're most creative, most productive. But they have to be facilitated, and that's the work of learning to work across difference. So many employees understand that. So what they did is they closed their diversity offices and moved all the employees over to their organizational development office and said, we are now going to do effective teamwork. And your job is to help people form and work effectively as teams. Still diversity work, we just don't call it diversity. So it hasn't gone away, it's being renamed because the demand is still there. You can't get away from it. You can't hire monoculturally. You can't serve monoculturally. You have to go work across difference. So it is true that there are areas of opportunity, whether they be education and hiring, that based on your background, it will be difficult to be hired. And I'm sorry for that, it's reality. Many people are working very hard to change that, but it's very, very difficult to change that type of cultural norm and value and how it gets done. So it does happen. And there are some gains. There are more women and more diverse people in different workforces than they were when I was young, but it's not done. Anything but done. And so for some of it is finding spaces where people explicitly tell you they value diversity, that they want unique perspectives, that they appreciate feminine ways of looking and being versus strictly masculine ways. And it's not hard to go over corporate or agency websites and materials and figure out who's got an open door, I should go there, as to this guy's an asshole, there's no way I'm working for him. Does that make sense?
It was just a hypothetical question. Just
I was
curious
real.
Because right. Thank you.
It's real. I often joke. I define white male privilege. I'm white. I identify as cisgendered. I identify with my gender. I'm heterosexual. I'm married. My wife is a doctor. Every privilege, I had a good education all the way through to a doctorate. Every privilege as possible is in the road for me. Other people will look at a situation and go, I couldn't possibly do that. And it's kind of like, what? Well, I'm not a white male with a doctorate. and so I have to be cognizant of the fact that not everyone has had the same opportunities, and there are multiple ways to go about and do things. And that's the practice of cultural competency and success. Yeah. But it is true. It's a battle all the time.
Exactly. As George Orwell perfectly put it, all pigs are equal, but not some are more equal than others. I'm just somehow still confused, because even in the 21st century, this resonates so loudly. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Americans have gotten very, our concept of civitas has decreased. We've become more combative and more entrenched. And so the pitch fights are ugly. in several situations, and it's sad. It's sad. But the other thing is that it's also not over. We've not dissolved, and so that's the interesting thing. It's an experiment. It's a practice, and so it's a matter of figuring out how and where we will land on that. I'm an optimist. I'm told I'm called by my critical pedagogy people. I'm told I'm a toxic optimist. I'm overly optimistic, but I believe that there are opportunities to continue to grow and learn from each other.
Yeah, thank you.
Larissa,
I wish optimism was really toxic, but also in a positive way. Thank you very much once again.
Larissa, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I have a hand up, but I suppose that we have still about 10 to 15 minutes for questions, or we would have had more, but we have to let the people go who are technically helping us here. So my question is linked to what Tanya and Alexei were asking about the contemporary situation with multiculturalism as a policy. Because what you were speaking about, that for a time people had to follow, say, affirmative action. Now they do not because of the Supreme Court decision, etc. But would you say, because I've heard here from quite a number of people that multiculturalism is dead. But I wouldn't say that, but perhaps your opinion is different. Please tell it.
Yeah, I would say that there's a backlash and a backturning on intercultural, multicultural constructs, and people are trying to roll back on those and not say we don't need them as much. But by the same token, like I said, with the corporate people I deal with, and I work. I'm a consultant dealing in assessment work and cultural competency, but I'm also a faculty member in international studies. And what I find in education is I have to teach the learners who come to the room, and they're diverse. And so I have to learn to adapt what I do as an instructor to serve my learners, to get them to learn. I can't just do the same thing I've always done. And so so there are those of us who recognize that the work isn't over and we continue to do it, and those who would prefer to entrench and pretend that they don't have to recognize people who identify as a gender other than the one they were born to, or they don't have to reach out and do a lot of listening with someone from a Latinx background, or try to understand the history and the trauma of someone from an African American. It's not important. I don't need that. And others go, well, yeah, you really can't get very far if you don't. So some of it is a matter of recognizing that there's a tipping point of growth and development that I believe cannot be rolled back. And so whether it's people are entrenched and fighting about it and wanting not to believe in it, they can't deny the fact that when they go out on the street at the end of the day, all these people are here. And this is who lives and works here. And it's difficult. You can't just say, well, go back to your homeland. I mean, someone could say, frankly, go back to your homeland. Any other than a Native American, everyone's got to fucking go. None of us belong here in the US. We all came from someplace else. I'd have to return to Scotland and Germany, and my family came in the 1700s, for God's sakes. I don't know where my home in Scotland is. But that's the where the demarcations are. So it's a matter of recognizing that the work isn't done, but that it will take different forms. What I'm finding in higher ed, because is that you'll have cultural groups, because kids like to join and sit with other Filipino children or Hawaiian Native or African American, and they have clubs. Club activity in the university is a good activity. Okay, we totally support that. No problem with it. But it's not affirmative action. It's just student clubs. Okay, in corporations, they call them ERGs, employee resource groups, and they all get together and they can talk out the issues and support each other in different ways. So there's lots of this thing going on in different ways. We're just not calling it the same thing because people found it exclusive. And our work is to be inclusive, which is the ultimate goal of this work, to create a sense of belongingness. It's important for us who do the work to really hold ourselves to what we're doing and do our damnedest to use the language and to practice the behaviors that are the most inclusive. Scholars, frankly, are lousy at being inclusive. We make all these little jargons and these cute little terms, and you're either a post-colonialist or, I'm a Marxist, and you're a, and we start using all this jargon and stuff, and no one understands us. It's not inclusive. We have to bring the language down to the most common denominator and bring people in and show them that actually it's a good thing to engage with difference. You'll learn something. You'll get better at what you do. Your success, if it's an individual success, will be more. If it's community or collective success, will be more because you're more inclusive. And that's the challenge of our work, is to work on those areas and practice this work. It's not easy, and I'll be honest. I have several colleagues who I will sit in brown bag luncheons of their latest research, and I'll listen to them and going, my God, there's 3 people in the world who understood what you said, and 2 of them are offended by it. I'm glad you did the study, but please bring it down. Seek commonality through inclusion. And that's the challenge and the balance of what's going on in the US. People who are entrenched are feeling left out, and for good reason. There's a lot of people who are being left out for a variety of reasons. And our job is to try to help them find the commonality of benefit for participating in the whole. And it's there, but it's not easy to get to, and it takes time and energy and patience and a whole hell of a lot of compassion, both self and other.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions, please.
Alex told me you weren't bashful. You said you were very, very, very discussive audience.
I could ask one more, continuing in the same direction. Could we say that the success of the society at present is to actuate this inclusivity from the situation that we declare it to the really actual way making some progress in common projects? And if yes, that what common projects could you imagine, say, for Oregon or for America at present, which could serve such a purpose?
There are many, and that's the thing, because we're a pluralistic country. But as an example, Oregon is unique in that it has a very high standard of environmentalism. People move here because the environment is clean and pristine, and they want to preserve it. I live in the most regulated city in the country. We call it the People's Republic of Portland. And so we recycle everything, okay? And we get very angry with people who burn too much or whatever. But there's lots to be done around the environment and better use of energy, water resources, animal resources, the oceans, etc. So the environment is huge. And what I'm finding is generationally, younger people are very tuned into the environment. It's a good thing. But you can't preserve the environment without bringing everybody in. And how you use the environment is culturally bounded. You know, many people say, be a vegetarian, don't eat meat, it wastes all sorts of energy. Well, you know, for certain cultural groups, that's fine. For other cultural groups, that's hell. So how do you balance those things out? We have a challenge with poverty. We have one of the largest houseless, that's the term we use here, not homeless, houseless population in the country. And so there's literally 7,000 people camping on the streets of Portland right now. So we're trying to find shelters, find better housing, more affordable housing, services that will help people understand why they need these work and what they're going to do. Because lots of the people who are houseless, not all, but many, are suffering from mental illness and or addiction issues. So they need support services to get over their addiction and to get treatment for their mental illness. So it's a very complex situation, but coming together and being willing to work toward. There's work to be done in education and what's happening with our schools all the way through college and how it's being held, who has access to it, who doesn't have access to it, how is it being taught, what are the resources being addressed to it. It's a huge issue and it really impacts all of us. And so there's so many issues like that that can be thought of and addressed. And it's more a matter of choosing to step up and find the areas that you feel you're best positioned to serve and commit to them in whatever way that you can. And that's part of being American. I found my copy of Alex de Tocqueville's Democracy in America as I was planning for this. And one of the things he found when he looked at the country way back in its founding time was that Americans would band together and do things that were frequently done by the aristocracy in Europe. But we don't have an aristocracy. So we would raise barns and make hospitals and mental health and build schools, etc. And so it is it's ingrained in us, but it needs to be, the flames need to be stirred, the pot needs to be stirred, it needs to be rewarmed. In order to continue to find that point of service, to me, all work is service, and if you don't love who you're serving, it's a long day. So, and it's gotta feed you in whatever way you find success is feeding you. So you have to find the service, and you know, there's all sorts of ways to do it, but it's a matter of thinking through that and committing to it. And we have a complex society that's challenged, and there's opportunities and there's challenges, and it's a matter of deciding where the best time and energy is for you to spend.
Thank you so much. And just if somebody came up with a question, just the last question then.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Is it in chat or is somebody raised their hand and I don't see it?
Excuse me, may I put a question?
Please.
Where did you study?
Oh, I studied at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor for my bachelor's in economic history. Then I went to Indiana University, Purdue University in Indianapolis to do a master's in public administration. And then much later, I did a doctorate in adult education at Portland State University here in Portland, Oregon.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Sveta, for questions. And thank you, dear Chris, for giving us such a wide view on the problem of success. And you tuned us for the further conference to look deeper into different corners, be it historical or contemporary. And if you can join us for further sessions, I know that you gave us an opportunity to listen to your investigation on, to your research on women leadership. That will be, yes, that will be on a Friday. but you are welcome to visit us on the roundtable too. That will be in the evening and reachable for you, because you are, of course, we must applaud actually Chris for raising up so early on the Pacific coast. For us, it is 7 in the evening, but for him, it is 8 in the morning. And he devoted his morning hours to giving us this lecture. Thank you, Chris, so much. And we'll be going on with our conference. And tomorrow, there will be a historical section starting at 3 p.m. Moscow time. It will be on the same link. There was some mixture, as I understood from the mail I checked, that somebody couldn't find the link, although it was in the letter, but they said there is no link in the program, but there was a link in the letter. That happens, unfortunately. But the link is the same for all the sessions, so I suppose that would provide people some more opportunity to visit our other sessions. And this particular lecture was recorded, and I hope that I can put it on site so that it will be could be revisited by people who would have liked to listen to it but couldn't because of some reasons. So see you tomorrow then, or at other sessions that are in the program, and until next time. Okay?
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.